Welcome to Murdock's Music Minute, again with a guest. Thanks for joining me.
Always the same guest?
Always the same guest. I only have got one person who's willing to talk about music with me live. Stefan Redelsteiner from Stefan Redelsteiner Experience. Check out our other videos that we've done together.
Yeah.
He's got his own channel where he talks about music, surprise, surprise.
And cruises.
And cruises, yeah. Sail on Sailor.
And I also have that the shirt is a rowing shirt. I don't have a surf. I don't have anything with surfing or sailing. But this is so rowing. I bought this in Henley-on-Thames, and it's the place where George Harrison lived, which doesn't really have any Beach Boys connection. But
well, water is always a good,
water and it's
good connection.
It's rowing
to be talking about, yes, the Beach Boys. Sadly, Brian Wilson passed away this year, but this is not meant to be a belated eulogy or jumping on the trend of talking about Brian Wilson. No, this year, 2025, actually marks the 60th anniversary of two.
Really three albums.
Actually, three.
About the first.
There's a third album that nobody talks about, but two albums that are.
It's insane. 3 albums in 1 year.
Yeah. Only King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard managed to do this nowadays.
Ryan Adams probably.
Yeah, maybe
10 years ago.
Yeah. But yeah, maybe that's also something that we get to talk about when we talk about these albums. So 60 years of two of the Beach Boys classics. At least I think most fans would agree that these two albums are quite important. Today and Summer Days and Summer Nights. I've got both albums on this rather not so elegant
those are great compilations. I also have some of those twofers by the Beach Boys. I have Sunflower and Surf's Up, Smile and Wild Honey. So I thought those are great introduction.
Yeah. I love the twofers. They don't look very good.
It's good value for money.
Yeah. You get 2 albums on 1 CD plus lots of bonus tracks and very good liner notes from David Leaf.
Yeah, I love that series.
Yeah, David Leaf, who is kind of the Beach Boys expert from the USA. But anyway, so we are here to sort of celebrate the 2 albums and just talk about them a little bit. What we think about them, what we like, maybe what we do not like, and how we personally would place them in the Beach Boys discography or in our personal musical taste. So the album that came out first in 1965 was...
I think in March.
Well prepared. Yeah. It's always good to have a guest.
That's the only thing I prepared.
Was Today with an exclamation mark, which sees the 5 Beach Boys sitting, I would say it's a swimming pool.
It's not a very inspired cover.
Yeah. One has to say, or in my opinion, most of at least the early Beach Boys albums didn't have the best covers.
Even Pet Sounds.
Pet Sounds probably has one of the most ridiculous covers.
I didn't want to be that harsh because you're the Beach Boy fan.
Yeah.
I'm a casual. My position on the Beach Boys is I like them, but I'm not an expert, and I'm one of those who tends to think that that real hardcore Beach Boys fans sometimes exaggerate the significance of the boys. But you are really a Beach Boys fan. You're really a fan. You have the complete catalog.
In the meantime, I would consider myself a real Beach Boys fan. I don't have the entire catalog, but I could claim that I listened to all of their albums bar one. So I even listened to the ones that I usually considered really, really bad. And they've got a couple of albums.
And are they really bad? Do you think that those like Summer in Paradise is often cited as the worst album of all time?
A lot of the bad albums really are bad. There are a few that I think are treated a bit too harsh, maybe. But some of the bad albums are really as bad as people say they are.
But we're not going to talk about bad albums today.
No, we're going to talk about, hopefully, 2 really great albums. So the first one, Today, as you mentioned, came out in early March. 65 and late 64, early 65 was an important point in time for the Beach Boys because that was when, unfortunately, Brian Wilson had his first major nervous breakdown and decided that he no longer wanted to tour. He didn't want to be part of the Beach Boys as an active touring band and that he would retreat to the studio in order to be able to really produce the music that he could hear in his head. It was also the time and I'm not a fan of, those drug stories, but it is part of 60s music. It was also the time when Wilson started to consume marijuana more, and this also apparently influenced him in his production and in his songwriting. And Today was maybe the first album where he felt that this was kind of a more mature, complete album, and not simply a collection of singles and filler tracks. This was also the time when he felt under maybe positive pressure from the Beatles, and when this kind of rivalry between
I think he always
Beach Boys
he
and the
always
Beatles
thought
began.
there's a rivalry, and I always thought that the Beatles themselves didn't really take him that serious as a rival. I know there's those quotes by Paul McCartney when he confirmed the rivalry, but Paul is always the diplomatic, the friendly Beatle. He wouldn't say
I don't know.
otherwise.
I don't
think
know how
John,
much.
George, and Ringo weren't really Beach Boys fans.
I don't think they were really listening to.
And they weren't inspired by them. No.
One of the biggest Beach Boys fans at that time was Keith Moon, actually.
Oh yeah,
He was a huge Beach Boys fan. Yeah. So Today, an album that sort of was the attempt to come out with this complete album in the vein of the Beatles and offer something with more sophisticated production, something that you had to, or could listen to as a piece of art from beginning to end, and an album that is clearly divided into the two halves. Side one is the more pop, up-tempo, still in the very much, as I would argue, in the style of the Beach Boys as it was before, but maybe with better production. We can talk about it. And what's usually for critics interesting is the second half, which is only ballads, very lush production, also a bit more unusual instrumentation, more complex harmony vocals, and it's usually considered the step or the blueprint for what would happen on Pet Sounds. So did you know this album before, or did you listen to it for the first time?
No, I knew both albums before. Okay. And should already tell you if I like them. I'm going to tell you.
Yeah. So what's
the point of hiding my feelings?
What was your experience, or are there any highlights, or is it just terrible for you? Or?
No, I really like those albums. I think they're great. I'm a casual Beach Boys fan, and if you're a casual Beach Boys fan, it's obvious that you're going to like those albums. It's what's the album, Carl and the
So Tough. Carl and the Passion's So Tough. Yeah.
It wouldn't be, for a casual Beach Boys fan, I don't like that album, for example. That's too deep into the Beach Boys thing. But those are the classic those are the kind of albums.
It gives you the Beach Boys sound that you would expect.
Those are the kind of albums, when you're a casual Beach Boys fan, you will like those mid-60s to late 60s albums. In my case, also the early 70s albums to a certain extent. Okay. So Today is... it's probably the starting point of Beach Boys, or especially Brian, thinking of themselves as artists, and I think that's a bit the problem for me starts here, because as an arrogant Beatle fan, I hinted at it. I never could take them as serious as, the serious songwriting genius Brian Wilson. I think that's a bit exaggerated. I think he was best with the what he did on the A side with the catchy pop songs. Okay. I prefer much more the A sides, and the critics and those very serious Beach Boys fans, they will say no, side B, that's where he found himself. And Pet Sounds isn't even because you were right, it's the predecessor to Pet Sounds, the side B of that album. Pet Sounds isn't even my favorite Beach Boys album. If I would be an AI and I would make an objective list of Beach Boys albums, I would say Pet Sounds is the best, but it's not my favorite. So the side B, which is like a lesser Pet Sounds, side B of the day, isn't really doing that much for me, but I love side A. I really, really like Today, but but the things I like of Today are mostly found on side A. And because I also love the Beach Boys of 63, 64, you know, I Get Around and
the
stuff
classic
like that.
surf pop sound.
I don't
of the
see
Beatles,
anything wrong.
the Beach Boys song.
I don't see anything wrong with that. When people always say they had to mature, they had to develop. No, they didn't really have to develop. They were perfect. I Get Around it. That's their perfection in a way.
Yeah.
And you know, there's some songs on side A that have that same, you know, that give you that feeling, that sunny. That's what I'm going for when I'm in the mood of listening to the Beach Boys. I wanna transform myself to a beach in California. I want to see the sun, the girls. That's the images I want to have in my mind when I'm listening to the Beach Boys. And side A is one of their best sides in terms of that.
Yeah.
And some of my favorite Beach Boys songs are on side A, and I once ranked my top 10 favorite Beach Boys songs, and I can't remember which place it was, but Help Me Rhonda it must have been in my top 5, and I mean the version from today.
The album version with the fade in, fade out at the end.
And Help Me Rhonda is the first Beach Boys song I ever heard. I listened to it before I even listened to the Beatles, because we had the 7-inch when I was, we already had it in the house when I was born probably. But it was, it's like the single version. But the single version we've had, because maybe it was in European pressing or something, is the version from today. So I know Help Me Rhonda as a single, but I know the version from today.
That's interesting.
And that's, to this day, when I hear this song, it's really great memories for me. And to this day, Al Jardine, usually when someone ranks the vocalists of the Beach Boys, Al Jardine isn't in the top 3 or anything, but to me, he's my favorite vocalist. Everyone goes on about, Carl Wilson, Brian Wilson, there's a wonderful singers. My favorite Beach Boys singer is Al Jardine. And this is his first lead vocal ever.
Yeah.
So when I came to know the Beach Boys, thinking that's the leader, that's the frontman of the group, Al Jardine. And to this day, he's like my favorite Beach Boy. Not as a songwriter, he's not a big songwriter, but as a whole, the couple of times when Al Jardine wrote a song, I always like his songs. He's my kind of guy.
Yeah, he's a bit of the
dark horse.
The dark horse in the Beach
George
Boys.
Harrison of the Beach Boys. I really like it.
Yeah. So first half is extremely entertaining.
He has this rasp in his voice. What I don't like about sometimes they're a bit too clean, too sterile. The complete sound, also the instruments, everything is a bit too session player style. And the voices of Carl and Brian, which are beautiful voices, they lack a bit of a punch, and Al Jardine brings that punch to me. He's that's the voice I can I can relate to most.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you wanted to say something
No problem.
different.
There's just good 60s pop tracks in the first half. Don't Hurt My Little Sister, where they try to be a little bit like the Beatles. When I Grow Up to Be a Man is a lovely track. That's fantastic.
That's my second favorite track.
It really encapsulates this. Or, I wasn't born then, but how I would imagine that growing up in the 60s felt like.
In California, maybe.
Yeah, this would be the soundtrack to that. And this often talked about creative rivalry between the Beatles and the Beach Boys. I guess it was there a little bit, maybe also fueled on by the press. But I would argue, if you look at it, maybe both groups, or not so much the other Beach Boys, but Brian Wilson and the Beatles, they maybe were striving for the same thing, which was perfection in pop and development, but they were coming from different angles. Also, the influences on Brian Wilson are a bit different than the influences where the Beatles were coming from. And so, I also wouldn't say it's not really valid to always compare the Beatles and the Beach Boys as two bands that were doing the same thing.
If I'm harsh, this is a video that Beach Boys fans will watch, so I know that I'm the bad cop here, but the Beatles were a real band. You can debate whether they're really good musicians. Technically, maybe they weren't even good musicians, but they were musicians. They played 8-hour sets in Hamburg, and they had a kind of earthiness, and they were a little garage group, like a proto-punk band in a way. And the Sgt. Pepper thing, and the big, we make like Pet Sounds, we make big, elaborate productions. That was just the sugar coating of this real band. And the Beach Boys were in the beginning, one great songwriter and 3 or 4
harmony vocalists,
great vocalists that really complemented the voices of the others perfectly, and that's the brilliant thing about them. But apart from Brian, were they really artists? Were they really musicians? Were they really in it for the art of it? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think they
And Brian, he was a genius in a way, and he was a great pop songwriter. But he was always, and that was also one thing maybe that led to his mental breakdowns. He was, judging from his lyrics, but also interviews with him and stories about him. He was a very naive man. As a man, his thinking was still like that of a 13-year-old in a way. I think, and that is something, to become a real artist, who writes about life and so on. You need to be a bit more mature than that. So it was perfect for those early 60s songs about being on the beach and girls and so on. And that's perfect. That's why I love those songs.
Okay.
But when he tries to be more profound, Beach Boys fans will, be like, "Wow, it's so profound. It's like it's the best songwriter of all time." But first of all, he didn't really write most of the lyrics.
The lyrics on Pet Sounds, most of them are not by Wilson. Yeah.
I don't understand that path of thinking that the Beach Boys fans have that always go on like, and he's so sensible, and the lyrics they are reflecting his inner child, and no, some professional songwriter made this. He just made the music, so I don't really understand it. It's still great music, and I love it. But I think he's not that big genius. I think he's not that big.
Yeah, there's a special mentality in the music, also in the lyrics of Wilson. But yes, a lot of the famous songs were at least co-written by other lyricists. So he needed a helping hand with the lyrics.
Nothing wrong with that. It's just he did nothing wrong. I just say some of the fans.
I would also say his strength definitely is in the production and in those creating those layers of vocals and instruments and how he heard that. And that's quite. Also, the Wilson wasn't. I've heard he wasn't the biggest rock and roll fan. It was his younger brother Carl Wilson. He was the one who brought in the rock and roll influences. Brian Wilson rather came from jazz vocalists and those doo-wop vocalist harmonies. That's something you don't find in the music of the Beatles. So
only as prestigious.
So I would say it's even though both bands were pop bands, though arguably the Beatles, at least by '66, were a rock band. They were doing different kinds of pop music, so in my opinion. But I can see what you mean with, I want the sunny, the happy, up-tempo pop songs. On the other hand, I can also understand that maybe the Beach Boys, or at least Brian Wilson, at one point got a little bit tired of repeating this.
I mean,
how often can you sing about girls on the beach and driving in your car? So that's what makes the second side quite interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's good, I don't want to come across negative. I just say I love the first side. And this is a brilliant, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe less.
All these albums are very short.
Yeah, it's like 10-15 minutes of pop perfection. And I can see that side B is also great in what it tries to achieve. But it's not, I don't connect with it as much as some Beach Boys fans do. And what I also don't like about, I don't really like albums with those concepts, with this split, like side A is this and side B is this. I prefer albums where it's, where the different approaches mingle with each other. That's
another question. Does this work for you or not?
I need a real sequencing in a sense, what fits together, not just, the rockers on side A and the ballads on side B.
Usually I would agree. I like some changes.
It's a bit lazy.
In dynamics.
It's a bit lazy kind of concept.
With Today, strangely, I think it works. I don't know why exactly.
The album works. It's just not entirely my preference.
Yeah. And the ballads on side 2 definitely are grower material. Yeah. I needed some time, but now songs like She Knows Me Too Well or In the Back of My Mind, I think it's excellent if you just listen to it. But I can understand anybody who says, I don't have the time to listen to this on headphones. I just want a concise pop song. So that's Today, and only I think 2 or 3 months later they already released Summer Days and Summer Nights.
They released it in summer '65.
Yeah, Bruce Johnston was on board, though you don't see him on board of the cover.
And I don't think you see Al Jardine either. Or?
Yeah.
I think it's just Mike, Carl, Dennis, Brian.
Al Jardine or Bruce Johnston, one of the two was ill during the photo session for the album.
It's also strange an album cover where you don't get the
the
balance.
And this album is maybe more what you would like, because I think it has more of a sequencing, different dynamics. A lot of critics say it's a step back again after Today, because it goes back to the more usual Beach Boys topics, girls, singing about places in the USA, the beach, sunshine. There was pressure from the label because Today only went to number 4 in the USA, and the label thought that's not enough. We want the hit singles, we want also the albums to be number 1 albums. So Brian Wilson, a little bit grudgingly maybe, returned to the more classic Beach Boys songwriting style. So what's your opinion of this album?
I love this album. I prefer it very much to Today. It's like, now Today is side A, that's great. And on this album it's like side A and side B prolong what side A on Today was. And I know, I'm a contrarian here. The critics and also the Beach Boy hardcore fans, therefore, they think it's a step back, probably. It's what they criticize, that's exactly what I want. This is the perfect Beach Boys album for me, in a way. It's not my favorite Beach Boys album. My favorite Beach Boys, my favorite phase of the Beach Boys is the phase after Pet Sounds. It's 67 to 70-ish. I like Smiley Smile. I like the Outlier album Wild Honey, which sounds like not anything else they did. It's more the rock and roll album, in a way, R&B rock and roll. And Sunflower is my favorite. Surf's Up is probably my second favorite. I like all those albums more than Pet Sounds and more than these albums. But of this phase, from the debut album up until even including Pet Sounds, this is my favorite, because this is what the Beach Boys should sound like. This is the Beach Boys perfection. The label was completely right. It's like the label, they were the villains in the story. To me, they're the heroes in the story. It's like, finally someone told them, make what you're good at. And California Girls is my all-time favorite Beach Boys song, album. Because it's the perfection. It's the better good vibrations. It's a good vibration without that. Now we want to be experimental. Now we want to be like Strawberry Fields Forever kind of song. It's the perfect Beach Boys song. And the whole album, is it the opener of the album? No, it's like...
it opens with the girl from
But it opens side B, I think, California Girls. It's like the mission statement of the album, and, everything that California Girls achieves, the rest of the album, in my opinion, tries to build on that. Although it's not the opener of side A, but in a way it's like the centerpiece of the album, and I think they could have also called the album California Girls. And I can understand that Brian and you and many people say, we're getting tired about singing girls on the beach, but when I'm in the frame of mind and I want to listen to the Beach Boys, I want to hear about girls on the beach.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, I would say if you want to know, or if you want to hear what Brian Wilson was all about before Pet Sounds, listen to Today. If you want to hear the Beach Boys at the top of their game, classic style, listen to Summer Days and Summer Nights. And actually, I agree with everything you say. I also prefer Summer Days and Summer Nights a little bit over Today.
And that's the unpopular opinion.
Yes, it's a bit of an unpopular opinion. Also, usually, labels usually always want to milk the cow, and they usually at one point they obstruct creative development. But with Summer Days and Summer Nights, the pressure from the label plus maybe Wilson's more sophisticated approach in the studio combined to create the perfect Beach Boys pop album.
The thing is, Brian Wilson needed that pressure,
The story
gets retold all the time that he collapsed under the pressure.
Yeah.
Many
At one
times.
point, it was too much. It was too
but
much pressure.
I think then he's weak because he's a pop star. He should
pop stars often are weak.
Yeah, but if he really would have, he should have accepted the challenge, the pressures of fame, and if he would have succeeded in that, if he would have stood the pressures and not collapsed, then first of all he would have been a much more happier person and so on. But I also think that the Beach Boys would have made much better music. I think, it gets so idolized these days.
Yeah,
it gets like almost like, wow, he had mental illnesses. That's the great thing about him. That's not the great thing about him.
No.
That's something,
Yeah.
people should have worked with him and should have helped him. I mean, obviously people did help him.
Yeah,
I'm not saying
but not always in the right way.
Yeah, it was maybe more like I help him and what do I get from it?
Yeah.
And I think that's what that's the sad aspect of the story. Not that he had mental problems, but the problem is much more that they weren't handled correctly.
But yeah, after 3 albums in a year, and it wasn't the only time the Beach Boys had to do that. I think at one point everybody breaks or says, "Hey, I need to take a step back or do just an acoustic album, and then have a 2-year break or whatever." And there are a lot of what ifs in the Beach Boys history. What if Smile had been released in '67?
What if Charlie Manson would have joined the group?
Yeah.
What would that have done to the sound of the group?
Yeah. But yeah. So also in my opinion, Summer Days and Summer Nights it's a fantastic album. Even though maybe the last 2 songs are a bit throwawayish.
What are the last 2?
I'm Bugged at My Old Man.
I like that song.
And then the beautiful a cappella And Your Dreams Come True.
I like I'm Bugged at My Old Man.
It's very tongue in cheek.
That fake Elvis voice.
Yeah, especially if you know about
his father.
The father of the Beach Boys. Actually, even that one has a bit of a dark twist to it. Yeah. But yeah, this. It has a great sequencing. It's just a fun album.
Yeah.
Today is a little bit more serious.
Maybe it's the more important album.
Yeah.
But Summer Days that's the direction they should have kept, in my opinion. And okay, then we wouldn't have gotten a Pet Sounds, and then everybody would be sad except me. but in my perfect universe, they would have gone on at least 2 or 3 years. Putting out albums like that. I'm not sure about that, but this is the one point where it's such a glorious.
They arrived at the perfect Beach Boys sound.
They have a kind of swagger on this album.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like they were having fun.
That sounds is lacking, in my opinion. They have really this. Yeah.
Despite the label pressure, it really sounds like they were having fun with this album.
Yeah.
And that transports to the listener. So, I would say both these albums deserve to be celebrated for their 60th anniversary. And if you're still not tired of the Beach Boys, then you can listen to Beach Boys Party, which is this throwaway.
It's actually funny. It's a fun album.
Gap stop between this one and Pet Sounds that it's usually forgotten or overlooked.
Yeah, it's not artistic value is questionable, but it's a unique album.
It's got Barbara
It's a very unique album, with the party songs.
But that was quite on vogue in the 60s. I think Trini Lopez has this fake.
It has this Trini
party
Lopez feel.
Crowd
album,
noises.
It's a fun album.
So get out your Today and Summer Days and Summer Nights. Maybe let us know what you think of these 2 albums or what your favorite album is. I'm sure at one point I will have to make a Beach Boys ranking.
That will be interesting.
But that would probably, the way I approach my rankings, will be a 3-hour video.
But
I'm not prepared for that yet.
I'm really, really looking forward to that.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks for coming.
For listening to my strange opinions. I hope I haven't insulted anyone's
I think
feelings.
Beach Boys fans are not as militant as some of the Beatles fans.
Really?
I'm not sure.
Okay, then I have a wrong impression.
We will see. We will find out very soon.
I think I'm not going to offend anyone else now.
Okay. We'll do that in a few other videos. We have lots of ideas how to offend the audience, so stay tuned for
our prog videos.
Our prog videos, yeah. Stay tuned for the next Murdock Music Minute. Bye bye.